Thank you very much. Professor Gerhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the ranking member as well and distinguished members of this committee. I appreciate the honor and the privilege to be able to appear before you today to talk about the basis for an impeachment inquiry of President Biden. I think a good place to begin is with the Federalist Papers. And in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton warned of the dangers of trivializing impeachment through petty partisanship. He foresaw that impeachment may, and now I quote, agitate the passions of the whole community and to divide it into parties more or less friendly or inimical to the accused. In many cases, it will connect itself with pre-existing factions and will enlist all their animosities, partialities, influence, and interest on one side or on the other. And in such cases, there will always be the greatest danger that the decision will be regulated more by the relative strength of the parties than by demonstrations of innocence or guilt. I think Alexander Hamilton knew what he was talking about, and I think what he said may well describe the current set of proceedings. One thing I might add to all of that is that the framers designed an impeachment process to follow or comply with several safeguards. And it's important that we keep these safeguards in mind as these proceedings go on. The first is the necessity for credible evidence of the commission of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. There is not, at least not that I've yet heard, such credible evidence. Let me give you an example of what I fear is similar to the current proceedings. Hunter Biden is arrested for speeding in a car owned by his father, and the police go after the father. I don't think that's how the law should work. I don't think that's how impeachment should work. I respect members of this committee enormously. Believe me, I'm just a law professor and citizen, and I come here with great awe when I speak to an important body like this. But I listened to Congressman Jordan, whom I respect a great deal, when he said there are 4 facts. Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. Hunter Biden was not qualified. So far, by the way, nothing about President Biden. Third, there were executives who asked Hunter Biden for help. Again, not yet any proof about any kind of complicity of President Biden. And lastly, Joe Biden gave a speech. If that's what exists as a basis for this inquiry, it is not sufficient. I say that with all respect, and I think that that is part of the problem, I think, and many Americans think, may exist with respect to these proceedings. A second safeguard is the Fifth Amendment Due Process Clause. It requires fundamental fairness, and I think in these proceedings, something has happened to President Biden that was said to have happened to President Trump in 2019, and that is the burden has flipped to President Biden to prove his innocence. Any further investigation is being done to ensure that Mr. Biden has to prove his innocence rather than the committee being able to connect the dots in a convincing and persuasive way. It's not me you have to persuade. It's the American people whose trust you deserve and whose trust you have to maintain. A third principle is judicial review. And here I would just remind the committee about the Supreme Court's decision in Trump versus Mazars. The court said about this committee that, in fact, it has to conduct an investigation for a legitimate purpose. A fishing expedition is not a legitimate purpose. Moreover, the court in Trump versus Mazars said that it is not a legitimate purpose for the House or House committee to be conducting the function of law enforcement. And I heard many references here to criminal misbehavior, to whether or not somebody should be thrown in jail, criticisms of a prosecutor, Mr. Weiss. That sounds to me like an attempt to really substitute for the proper legitimate proceedings of the House. 2 other safeguards real quickly. One is that these proceedings should be based on principle, not partisanship. And I fear that what we're hearing today, which can trace all the way back to 2019, and accusations made against Mr. Biden as far back as then are really driven by partisan animus more than they are by principle. And a final safeguard is for the House, the full House, to authorize an impeachment inquiry. That does not come from me. That comes from Speaker McCarthy. He said there should be the full House's approval. It also comes from Mr. Trump's Justice Department, who said there must be a committee must be authorized by the full House. That has not happened here. My concern is with the Constitution. That's what my devotion is to. And I hope all of us understand that there's nothing more serious than honoring our Constitution and following the design the framers gave us. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired.